Today, ladies and gentlemen, was the best round of the Tata Steel 2021 chess tournament thus far. 7 games overall, and 5 of them were decisive. I will be showing you 6 because we always take a look at the Magnus Carlsen game, and I guess one person and one opponent are going to feel a little bit left out. But we're going to kick things off, as always, with Magnus Carlsen playing against Pentala Harikrishna, kind of the Indian representative, if you will, because Vishy Anand is not playing in this event. And Pentala goes for a Sicilian defense against Magnus after knight f3, e6, one of my favorite Sicilians, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight c6, knight c3, both sides developing, queen c7, this is known as the Taimanov variation, named after Grandmaster Taimanov. And Magnus Carlsen plays f4, which is like the 4th most popular move in a position where white has played tens of thousands of times. And really the most interesting moment, everything that comes after this is theory. This is all the top move of the position. The players are both very well prepared, right up until this moment. And here there's still several hundreds of games, and here Pentala plays a move, c5, which doesn't look, I mean, groundbreaking, it's just a pawn push, but it's only been ever played 2 times, which means that he's very well prepared in this position, coming in with an opening surprise against Magnus Carlsen, and the point is that you just want to expand with c4. Magnus plays b3, stopping that, but a few moves later, he plays it anyway. He plays it anyway. It looks like you're stopping it, but what ends up happening is that Pentala waits for Magnus to take on c4, doubling his structure, and then takes on e4. And essentially, after a big trade of pieces, he can just play rook c8, and there's no way for Magnus to hang on to his extra pawn. So Magnus, what he tries to do here is to play f5. This is a very good decision, because look at his queen and 2 rooks staring down this side of the board. Who's on the other side is the king. It's a nice moment. You break in the center, create a pawn trade situation when your opponent's king is on the other side. But in this case, we get queen takes c4. And you're going to lose your most powerful attacking piece. I'm going to try to trade queens with you. So we get f takes e6. Now you can't take my queen right away because I'm going to throw in a check, a Zwischenzug, an in-between move. So that's why we get f6. Now Magnus plays queen b7. He doesn't want a queen trade, but it doesn't matter. Pentala just comes back with the queen, and some moves later there has to be a queen trade, and Pentala just stays patient. This pawn's not going anywhere, and he ends up winning it in a short while, and a few moves later everything gets traded off into a draw. And this is where the players agree on move 30 to not continue. So a very nice opening surprise there from Pentala, neutralizing Magnus Carlsen. It's the best thing you can ask for when you're playing Magnus with the black pieces. I mean, not much else to say, but I did promise you 5 decisive results. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's now go to the player who is on the thumbnail, Anish Giri. This game is an oasis of memes, if you will. Anish Giri playing the tournament leader, Niels Grandelius. Sorry, I keep saying Niels, and you guys say Nils. I'm going to say Nils. Niels Grandelius playing against Anish Giri with the black pieces. They go also for a Sicilian defense. And what's interesting is that they go for a Najdorf Sicilian. So Anish Giri recently published the course on the Najdorf Sicilian. And, well, why is this significant? Because he plays one of the lines now, but Anish did it for the black pieces. Anish is playing this game with white. So e5 attacks the knight drops back, both bishops to the middle, black develops, white develops, and black plays the move h5. Very common move. It looks kind of stupid. Looks like Niels is, I don't know, just doesn't know what to do, so he pushes a pawn, but he's trying to stop g4. And the thing is that if he ever castles this way, white is not going to be able to so easily attack. It's a common idea in the Sicilian. Don't try this at home, though. Bishop f5, bishop e2, and a5. a4, both sides castle short. Knight d7, f4, pawn takes, bishop takes, and rook c8. And the reason why this is funny is because Niels is playing something against Anish, which Anish recommended in his course. In fact, there was like a screenshot on Twitter that said, you know, Anish suggests this move and is like, yeah, well, yes, okay, it's an interesting novelty, you know, I don't want to do an Anish impression on the fly, but he's like, it's an interesting novelty leading to some, you know, some play for black, some interesting play for black. So Anish himself writes a course, Niels plays it against him, and here Anish has to decide whether he's interested in course sales or he's interested in the prize fund money, and so we get c3, defending his pawn from attack, knight to f6, and Anish sacrifices a pawn. You'll notice that he just basically leaves this pawn completely, allows it to get taken, but he's essentially relying on the fact that the h-pawn is weak and the a-pawn is weak. And watch, bishop f3, bishop g5, bishop trade, knight slides back, and queen goes to f5. So now the queen is attacking the bishop, and the other side of the board has a weak a-pawn. So we get knight g4, he picks this up and trades. Now, Anish Giri is going to win this game on one thing and one thing only. We are nearing the end game, which, if you want like an arbitrary way to think about it, is half of the pieces, like knights, bishop, queen, rook, have been traded. Queens have been traded, both sides have traded bishop and knight, close to an endgame. Pawns. And you'll notice that here I have 3 and you have 1. So I have a 3-on-1 majority, which means in the future I can focus on that side of the board and promote those pawns. Watch what happens as the game progresses. Anish Giri listens to my advice, even though the game already happened, and technically I'm, recapping what he did, but it doesn't matter. So look, he sacrifices a pawn. Anish is a pawn down, but these pawns are looking nice. We get knight to g4, bishop slides out of danger, rook to d3, and knight c4. Nice idea, look at that, X-ray defense. Here Nils plays rook takes d4. He sacrificed, but if he had done this, it's still really difficult to stop me from pushing my pawn. Like, I mean, this bishop is, it sees this, it's never going to take it. This knight is nice, but it's not accomplishing anything. You're not really stopping anything from just allowing me to push my pawns. So he sacrifices and plays bishop f6, but I think what he didn't realize is that he doesn't actually have anything here. And on move 39, right at the time control, he had to resign. He resigned because, for example, if knight takes d1, I'm going to go check in between moves, Zwischenzug. 2 times we've seen this already, and now rook takes d1, and this is simply lost for black, not for white. So Anish Giri made this game look like it was nothing. Anish just got out into the opening, played a nice little transition in the middle game to win the a5 pawn, and won in the endgame. Great game from Anish Giri. And the next game that I wanted to show is the game between Fabiano Caruana and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Why? Because this game has relevance to the game that we just saw, and if you didn't see the recap video yesterday, the game between Fabiano Caruana, the game between Nils Grandelius and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So it's another Najdorf. And if you didn't see that recap, this is a poison pawn Najdorf. It's when black plays queen b6, queen takes b2. Now, Nils played this against MVL, and MVL misremembered his opening on move 19 and ultimately ended up losing the game. He lost the game. So it's funny that they go into it again, but here Fabiano does not play the move that's theoretically known. He doesn't play the move f5. Well, not theoretically known as, it's a known move, but it's out of fashion. You see, super grandmasters are like fashionistas, okay? Sometimes certain things are trendy, and sometimes they're not. If all of them decide to play one move in a Najdorf, all of them gonna play that one move, even if older moves have not necessarily been refuted. So Fabiano plays bishop e2, which if you look in the database has been played by very strong players, but not recently. Knight c6, take, and e5, breaking in the center of the board. Knight to d5, take, and here we get e takes d5. Now, if you ask me for a natural move here for white, probably just short castle, right? Maybe take to open the center. Here, Fabiano plays the move e6, which is just a freaking classy move. Like, you look at e6, you go, what is he doing? You just take the pawn. Well, there's a reason MVL didn't take it, okay? So here's why. If MVL had taken this with the bishop, what ends up happening is white castles. Now, but I have sacrificed my pawn, and your bishop is going to be the target for my attack. I am going to use the fact that your bishop is here to get it away and make sure your king will be hunted down in the middle of the board. I would not be able to do this so easily if I took on d6, because you would take, and that one move allows you to get your king out of the middle of the board. At the same time, if I push and you take with the f-pawn, you've opened up the line here. Okay, and I still have my f5 move. So in giving you pawns, I'm opening the position beneficially for myself, and you're not getting any time to develop. See, black just needs 2 moves, but black is never going to get those 2 moves, because I keep throwing pawns, and by the time you take everybody, I've got the e-file directly open. I'm going to castle, and if you play bishop e7, I'm going to take it. Now your king's just stuck in the middle of the board. I got queen g5 on the way, and it does not matter that I'm down, what, 3 pawns? Look at your pieces. All your pieces fell asleep in their bed and never showed up to war. So that is what Fabiano's doing here with the sacrifice e6, and MVL plays f6 because he doesn't want that to happen. So we get bishop h5. Now you cannot play g6 because I would take this, and I'm going to be attacking your rook, right? So he has to move his king, And now Fabi has done his job. MVL's king is going to be stuck in the center for the rest of the game. MVL, to his credit, does go for a queen trade. He forces a queen trade because if you are under attack, you want to trade your opponent's most powerful piece. In this case, it is the queen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's always going to be the queen, and then he does this. So how is Fabiano going to break in now? Well, let's see if he's able to show us. He's going to use the next wave of pawns. He immediately goes for the weakness on f6, bishop e7, rook b6. Now the rook has entered on the open file with pressure. h5, h3, keeping it all glued together. King e8, the bishop slides back. Hello, who's protecting the d6 pawn? Oh, I know, nobody. But Fabiano demonstrates patience, bringing his king up one square. This king is going to be useful in the endgame and doesn't want black to go forward because then you will take the pawn. So MVL goes for a big trade, right? That's what he goes for. The thing is that this doesn't really help. We got a protected passed pawn here on e6 that's not moving. So king c4, rook h7, bishop e4. What are you going to do? Bishop e7. Finally, we cash in because once our king has gotten in, we're going to win the other pawns. Take, take, bishop b7, and now Fabiano does what all grandmasters do so well, the same thing we saw Anish do, transition your winning position into a winning endgame. You are only one pawn up, but you have activity, the connected, protected passed pawn, not connected, but it's defended by a connected pawn, and you're going to pick up both of these pawns which are not going anywhere. This is now 2 rounds in a row that somebody made MVL's Najdorf look not so good after all. If Fabiano and Nils picking up points against MVL, Fabiano winning a game in, I mean, seemingly non-competitive fashion, it almost felt like. Just a very nice example of opening preparation, beautiful pawn sacrifice idea, and he gets, I believe this is his second win so far of the tournament. But we are nowhere near done, ladies and gentlemen. Let's jump ahead to the game with Arjan Tari and Jordan van Forest, both #2 players in their respective countries of Norway and the Netherlands. e4, e5, a Spanish, but one that was not so boring. This is a setup we very rarely see. Knight to e7 after the bishop moves. In fact, it's so rare that by move 7 or 8, only 10 games played in the database. That's how you know we're in for an interesting game. The point is that black doesn't go to the traditional square of f6 because black wants to reinforce the knight with the knight, which reinforces the center pawn. And so what's going to happen a little bit later is maybe black will get to play the move f5, opening up the f file for an attack. Knight to g6, bishop g5, f6 to block the bishop, and castles. Yes, this diagonal is a little bit weak, your king's a little bit exposed, but a lot of you always are like, doesn't that weaken my king? So what? So what? A check, king to h8, and? That's what you gotta ask in chess. And what? Is there anything? Well, that's why Tari goes for d5, takes, and then pushes his pawn forward to activate his queen. Now, Jordan needs to deal with this kind of nagging pressure, so first he kicks out the bishop, slides his king over, then he slides over the rook to b7, and then he plays rook to b6. Nice idea to kick the queen out and only then recapture. Knight d2, bishop b7, c4, and now, what is the pawn break that I mentioned earlier? Where are the useful pawn trades in the position to open things up? f5. This is going to be a problem for 3 reasons. Number 1, this is going to open the light squared bishop. Number 2, this is going to activate the rook. And you know what else? This activates the sideways door for this rook. If this knight ever moves forward, the rook goes to g6 and pressures the g2 pawn. Oh, that is not what happened in the game. f5 is a multi-purpose move. You know what? There's a 4th reason. If this knight moves out of the way, the queen is going to be activated. One pawn move opens the gates for Jordan van Forest. So we get bishop c2, take, knight g5, knight f5. Boom, the queen is activated. Oh my. Oh my. We have a horsey convention. Look at this. All the horses standing next to each other. bc4, knight takes e5, knight to d4. Beautiful move, by the way. Can't take, because fork. Ouch. That's not how the game ended. But we got rook to e1, knight c2, queen c2, and rook to e6. I did say the rook has lateral movement. You know, doing a little shish kebab here with the knights. Queen c3, queen e7. One pawn move activated all of black's pieces. And after some tactical exchanges, black is simply piece up. Rook e5, queen f6, Queen c2, knight jumps into d3, defended by the pawn, the rook is hit, the queen is hitting all of this, and the f2 square, and on move 33 for white, Ariantari resigned to Jordan van Forest, who again, we're seeing like just start to finish dominance in some of these games. Unbelievable stuff, another seemingly very easy win. We're going to jump to the game with Radoslav Wojtaszek next and Andrei Esipenko. Some of these guys might be unfamiliar to some of the newer fans, but these are some of the best players in the world. Andrei Esipenko, I believe, is 20, maybe 19 or 20 years old, trying to get into the 2700 club. Radoslav Wojtaszek, super strong player, number 2 in Poland, a longtime member of the 2700 club. And this was a Nimso Indian defense, basically preventing white from trying to go e4, by pinning the knight to the king. Now, there's a lot of main lines here. f3 is not one of the main lines, but the point is you're trying to go e4 and support it with a pawn. That's why black plays d5, a3, and volunteers themselves for a slight, passive structure, but turns the game into chaos. b5, sacrificing a pawn, but bringing out the bishop with a tempo. Now c6, knight comes back to a3, take. What the hell is going on here? Black gave away a bishop for like no reason, just to hang on to this pawn. The pawns are doubled. White has 2 bishops. Knight d7, knight e2, and rook b8. Black made the game unorthodox because now there's a clear plan of action. So we get rook back to a2, castles knight c3, queen a5, and Wojtaszek is 1 move away from castling. Rook d8, and he plays queen c2. Now we get c5. So Esipenko is not going to let Wojtaszek just get easy development, because by the time he castles, take, knight c5, there is pressure, right? And so this makes Wojtaszek have to react. Knight to b5, which defends the bishop, but puts it in the line of sight of a lot of pieces. We get rook takes d4, taking anyway, and knight jumps into b3. The knight is hitting the knight. You cannot take me because I'm going to play cb3, forking you. So we get knight back to b5, take, and queen takes a2. Wait a minute. What the hell is going on here? Bishop takes c4. Wait, now we're pinned? I thought we were winning material. Oh yeah, knight to a1. What? Bishop, whoa. Queen c3, queen a4. Yeah, good luck. Good luck. You have b3. Nice. Take. Rook c1, g5. Position where black is a pawn up in an endgame. Again, where's the pawn? Outside past pawn. Why g5? Create space for your king. And because you have a knight, and this is a light squared bishop. By the way, just if anyone's confused, rook b3, there is mate. So you have to stop that. Since this is a light squared bishop, if black creates a dark squared setup with the pawns, black is going to have a good time. And so we get rook c3. The king comes closer. The pawn comes closer, right? Trying to mobilize the pawn structure. King e3, h4, g3, h3. Leaving this here because this pawn is going to be a target. If the knight can ever get there, or if the rook can ever get there, that pawn's a big weakness. Not just mindlessly chop. h3, bishop d1, rook b2. You say, Levy, why did he just let his rook come in? That seems kind of dumb. Well, the truth is, I say, what else is he going to do? If he plays bishop back to c2, I'm going to just bring my pawn. Or I'm going to bring my rook anyway. If you just don't move like you play a move like rook to d3, what do you think? I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to go g4. I'm going to try to activate my knight. If you go here, I'm going to start pushing my pawn. I've created an unblockable structure, right? You can't do anything about it. The second you push in the center, my knight comes here. So it was going to happen one way or another, right? It wasn't just voluntarily retreating and getting smashed, but this is a nice idea. Esipenko sacrifices a pawn to damage the structure and then takes on e4. And the white king is overloaded. It can't guard both spots. So we get rook a3, knight slides back to g5, giving away the a7 pawn, but just in time with this sneak maneuver to deflect the king back into the middle. And now the rook comes in, picks up the pawn, and the game is simply lost. A beautiful example of how to advance your pawns in the endgame, creating a weakness over there in the corner, sneaking in, picking it up, and that pawn is going to be your pride and joy. And Esipenko wins a very nice game with the black pieces. Another win with black. And, the meta is that, playing with black, you got to be solid. Playing with white, you got to go for the win. These guys are playing for a win with white, black, pink, purple, fuchsia, I don't know, maroon. Anyway, The final game of the day, as always, we will end with ALIREZA Firouzja versus Jan Krzysztof Duda. ALIREZA is playing with the white pieces. The last time these two met in Classical was the basically only Classical tournament held last year, which was the Norway Chess. Well, let's go. D4 knight f6, and Firouzja once again has no business. Wants no business going into people's deep theory. Instead, plays a London. Plays a London, puts his knight in the middle, and then plays bishop d3, b6, and yo, London people, listen up. Watch this game. Hey, h4. Plays the move h4, tries to go g4, g5, maybe bring his queen out, not committing his king. You see, ALIREZA is not just lazily castling, he's going for an attack, right? He brings the pawn to h5 because he wants to damage the structure a little bit because black already committed his king here. Knight to d7, knight to f3. Duda wants to kick out the knight, so we get knight d3, cd4, knight d4. Oh, interesting, wants to go knight e6. e5, knight e6, queen c4. What? Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The bishop is hanging, the rook is hanging. So what does Firo do? He takes on f8, takes back on f8, which means that this bishop is going to have to move out of danger. So it goes back to g3, knight goes to c5. Knight takes. I mean, you're up material, we simplify. Rook h4. Don't you just love ALIREZA Firouzja? e4, the knight is getting in here, and Firo plays queen e2, going for a queen trade, and slides the king out of the way and goes, and, as I told you earlier in the recap, you gotta go, and, where's your attack? f5, king to g1. Rook c8, so what is Firouzja gonna do now? It doesn't seem like he can make a lot of progress. Oh yeah, rook h1, king f7, king... What? Bishop e7, a3, waiting move, b5, rook ad1, yo, and now Firouzja does what all these other really strong and older, more experienced grandmasters do, rook takes d3. And he tries to send the endgame into one, he tries to send the game into an endgame, where he can pick up this weakness later. So rook d1, bishop takes a3! What? Oh! Duda sacrifices his bishop to try to make it an endgame that's a draw by activating his rook, winning the pawn, and using his passed pawns. So Firo goes king back to g1, rook takes a3, oh, the king's coming, the king's went that way, now it's going back the other way. We get b4, king to e1, b3, king to d2, b2, and rook b1. Right on time, rook b3, look at this box. If black's gonna have it his way, he's gonna go bam, 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 bam. So we get bishop c7, pawn to d4. By the way, you know what's crazy? Bishop c7 is the only winning move. And you want to know what the idea is? Bishop a5, bishop c3. Look at that. Bishop c7, bishop a5, bishop c3 to pick up this pawn. So that's why Duda plays d4, sacrificing. ed4 activates the king. Sacrifice the king to bring the... sacrifice the king. Sacrifice the pawn to bring the king closer, try to get king to c4. So we get f4. g6. h6. Hey, remember what ESIPENKO did last game? You see how it works? He leaves the h7 pawn for the future. So king d4, bishop e5, king e4, bishop takes b2. Rook goes back to b7. We get a check, sacrificing the f4 pawn. But check, king g4, king d3. This pawn is the moneymaker. If that pawn did not exist, this would be a draw. So we get g5. Bishop d4, rook goes to e6. Rook goes to f6. Rook goes to a6. f4, king e4, rook e7. It's a balance. You see Firouzja's activating his pieces. King, bishop, rook, all active. Bishop e5 blocks the check. Rook b7, bishop f6. Trying to pick this up. Rook b4, bishop slides back. King go h5. Rook to d6. Why? Some threats here. Some threats here. So the rook goes to a4. But now the king is activated. What Duda should have done here? Well, I mean, there was a lot of things that he could have done. After bishop to d4, king h5, rook d6 is the critical move. Maybe he could have played rook b1 to, for example, go for backwards checks, or in a future moment try to sneak around here, but this endgame is winning, and Firo just made it look effortless. He ends up sacrificing his g2 pawn, does Firouzja, because even if you lose this pawn, I got rook to d1, and your king got stranded on the edge of the board Because if it ever takes, it's rook h1 and it's mate. The pawn is the constant thorn in the position, because if I ever win the h7 pawn, my pawn is just going. So you've got to navigate your king to h5 to pressure the pawn, to try to win the pawn, but I've got constant tricks once your king gets locked on the edge of the board. And after bishop f6, king takes h6, rook d1, and that's how the game ends. If you give me a check, I just block with my bishop, and your king cannot escape death on the h-file. A crazy game. Firouzja wins again, and at the end of day 7 in the Tata Steel 2021 Chess Championship, Chess Tournament if you will, these are your standings. Jordan van Forest, Anish Giri, Fabiano Caruana, and ALIREZA Firouzja with 4.5 points out of 7. The two gentlemen from the hometown, the home country of the Netherlands are in first and second place tie. Magnus Carlsen after his draw today with 4 points. And David Anton made a draw against Anton Demchenko. That was the only game that I didn't show today. But that game, and both of those gentlemen, they're struggling. They gotta pick up a few points to get back into the race. Hey, what a day, huh? What a day. Hope you enjoyed. I look forward to making the rest of the recaps for you.